Hi everybody, I'm Mandy Jones. I am a faculty member in the College of Pharmacy, and I'm here today to talk a little bit with you about error disclosure. You're about to experience a simulation with this topic, and we just wanted to get you a little bit of information about what that looks like and just get you ready for that simulation. So I have here with me today Paula Holbrook, and I'll let her talk a little bit about what she does and who she is.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, students. Hope you're doing well. Paula Holbrook. I'm one of the attorneys in the Risk Management Department of UK Healthcare. My official title is Clinical Risk Manager, Associate Director of Risk Management, and Associate General Counsel. I was a nurse by training initially, then a lawyer. I've been in practice 25 years, the last 10 of which have been here at UK Healthcare.
All right, so I wanted to just kind of set the stage. The students at this point will have talked about the peer model, which is a form of communication. It's to help facilitate team communication with each other, and communication with the patient. And it involves things like speaking in plain language, empathy, empowerment, and then just speaking to each other with respect. And so probably one of the biggest fears that we all have as a healthcare professional is being involved in a medical error. And then having that conversation with other members of our team, other colleagues, or even supervisors or directors, and then eventually with the patient. That's probably one of the most complex, difficult conversations that we'll ever have. So when these things happen in practice, how do you even begin to have that conversation? If you're consulted in terms of risk management, what does that look like? Like, how do you engage the team, and how do you coach them through this process and what it would look like?
One of the first things we do in order to provide advice, counseling, and support in this situation is we get some of the facts. So one of the first things we need to know is what happened. And while it sounds very basic and simple, it's critical to have an early grasp of the facts to the best you can understand, and what unfolded in the care of the patient over time, what the degree of harm is to the patient, because that is going to direct the conversation as much as anything. We also need to know who was involved in the error in terms of the nature, scope of the error, and what was the impact on the patient's family. So that's how it typically begins.
Mm-hmm. So when an error occurs, one of the things that the patients want to hear and need to hear is an apology. And as healthcare providers, we sometimes don't know, is there a right way to apologize? Or there's a little bit of fear that if we apologize, are we admitting guilt, or admitting, potentially opening ourselves up to litigation? How would you answer that or go about that?
One of the first things I would do would be to counsel the team in terms of making sure you have all the facts, because those facts will dictate what you say and how you say it. But a couple of general premises apply that are consistent with the formalized elements of peer. And one is, if you're going to apologize, make sure you know what you're apologizing for. Sometimes you don't have the information to apologize. And so one of the first things you might say is, we're really sorry this happened. And you can fill in the blanks in terms of what this is. We are really sorry, for example, that the wrong vent settings were set and there was a resuscitation as a result, or that your daughter got the wrong medication and had to stay in the hospital a couple more days. So one of the first things you would say is, I'm really sorry that happened. One of the next immediate things you would say is, we're not sure why or how that happened, but we're reviewing it. And we will update you when we have more information. And then you have to follow up on that promise to update with more information. And there are some times where you may not have all the information you know. Mm-hmm. But there's an agreement to be open, honest, and transparent, and respectful. So while you are saying, I'm sorry, you should be doing some other things. Number one, getting that additional information, both internally as a team, and then getting information in response to the questions that they're asking. Like, what the care is going to be going forward. Will that change the person's life? In what way? Will they get a hospital bill? So you will be answering those questions as the information unfolds. But one of the first things you also should remember is be kind, be empathic, compassionate, allow them to answer questions, and included in that is active listening and being mindful that you are dealing not only with a family who's distressed, but you might be in a group of distressed team members. So I think making sure as you share information and avoid blame that you care for each other by being respectful.
So you just mentioned teams and sometimes being within a group. And not only is the patient and the patient's family distressed, but this is stressful for the team as well. I mean, no one wants to make an error. How does that look in terms of when a team actually does this together? Or actually, is there even a time where teams would be in a disclosure together and do this together? Does that ever happen?
Yes, there are occasions and circumstances in which a team disclosure would be absolutely appropriate. But it depends on the facts and circumstances and is generally associated with a complex, high-harm error. And in that case, in meeting with the team, which me and my colleague, Margaret Pizzicato, have done, one of the first things we do is we get, some facts. We may conduct a root cause analysis or two, depending on the complexity of the matter and the degree of harm. But often when we do a team disclosure, it is based on a complex, high-harm matter involving multiple disciplines. And often those adverse events evolve over a period of minutes, hours, and it could be days. But included in that preparation, in that team disclosure, would be some preparation, guidance, and support in terms of who's going to disclose what. And counseling to avoid blame. Because often in medical errors, it's not one error occurring in isolation. It's a series of errors that occur over time, which would indicate a process or systems problem. And that's why it's important for us to get facts, often through a root cause analysis, have those team members involved in the care of the patient, involved in that root cause analysis, which then makes them better prepared to participate in a team disclosure in which we have defined roles. We may do some rehearsal and role play in advance of that to better prepare the team so that we have clear expectations of not only roles going forward, but what will be said and how that is said.
So you mentioned at times where there's been a team of people regarding a disclosure. Can you give me an example of what maybe that would look like? So when there's multiple professions that may have been involved in an error, what would that look like when they actually have to talk to the patient about that?
In a case that is at the forefront of my mind, some years ago we had a complex high harm matter that occurred over hours into the next day. So maybe about a 16-hour problem involving multiple professionals and disciplines. And in that case, we conducted a couple of swarms regarding what happened.
You mentioned swarm. What is a swarm?
A swarm is UK's defined method for conducting a root cause analysis. It's not an acronym for anything in particular. We use it as a noun and a verb, and it's a process that we borrow from Toyota, wherein whenever an adverse event happens, whether it's been low harm, no harm, such as a near miss, or high harm.
Okay, what's a near miss, actually?
A near miss is when we have something that nearly results in harm, but it's a signal. It's a very important signal that we need to review a systems or process issue. So in those cases even, we will stop what we're doing. We will pull the people who were involved in the care of the patient. So it could be any number of people from any number of disciplines, clinical disciplines and hospital operations. We pull them together and we analyze what happened by doing a timeline, why and how it happened, identify problems, and then identify solutions. And the goal is to ascertain what happened in rapid fashion in a blame-free, protected environment. So in the matter that I was using as an example, we had 2 big swarms. We had a smaller swarm involving a subpart of the care in various granular aspects of those operations. So when we got that information, we prepared as a team, and we assembled the right people, we thought. We called the patient, told them to come, the patient's family. So parents, brother, sister, we met with them, and we assigned roles in the swarm. For example, we had a leader, a clinical leader in the swarm. Margaret was the legal leader. We had an administrative leader, and then we had other people there available to provide additional support and answer questions for the patient and the family. So preparing for that swarm involved role play, education of some of the providers, and we even made sure one particular provider who was distraught had bullet points that he needed to stick to. Mm-hmm. So, and we did some rehearsal, some guidance. We set the stage for the team disclosure out of the hospital. We thought that was important because they were upset about coming back into the hospital. So we staged it very carefully. And that was the first meeting. Then we had a second meeting with less people, in which we actually concluded by advising them that they had the right to get an attorney and that we would be willing, when they were ready, to talk about compensation.
So this sounds, depending on, I guess, the complexity of the error, this could be one meeting with a patient, or it sounds like it could even be potentially more meetings as you gather maybe more information.
That's correct. So one thing about disclosure and that needs to be recognized is it's not always a single conversation. It can often be a series of conversations depending on the complexity. You know, when you're dealing with distressed team members and a distressed patient and their representatives, often people need a chance to process the information, process the process, and the opportunity to come back with more questions, bring additional people in, or take people out. And so it's really a conversation and evolution in which we are providing information as we have it, as it evolves, as the relationship evolves surrounding this event. So it could be something simple, like a nurse manager or another department supervisor saying, we made this mistake. Here's what happened. Here's how we addressed it. We're sorry it happened. And let us know if you have any questions. That's an example of an acknowledgement of a mistake, a disclosure, no harm, but an acknowledgement and an apology, and then information that we're going to do that the team members of this discipline or that profession might undertake to rectify it with the person. You know, some immediate service recovery in the moment, as opposed to something more complex that would involve a series of meetings and eventually maybe a resolution involving compensation.
Paula, you actually just touched on compensation and potentially, as you're doing disclosures, the fact that sometimes it's a series of multiple conversations as you gauge and gather more information. Sometimes patients will actually ask you something you just don't know the answer to. You're kind of on the spot and you don't know how to answer that question. So what if that happens? I mean, how would you advise us as healthcare professionals to handle that when we don't know the answer to a question, especially if they ask, what about my bill? What would you suggest?
Well, I would, often patients or their representatives will ask about a bill, or I'm going to talk to my lawyer, or I'm not paying it. And they'll ask anyone in the room, so it could be anybody who walks in the room. Mm-hmm. And my guidance to the person in the room, the professional, would be to say, that's something that I don't know the answer to, but I will put you in touch with the person who does. Otherwise, they may make a misstatement or make a commitment that's out of scope for their role. So it's always acceptable to say, I don't know the answer to that question, or I don't know, and I'll find out and I'll come back to you, or I'll get the person who knows that answer. So it's okay not to volunteer an answer for something you're not familiar with. So you could punt.
Okay, that's good to know. So sometimes we don't know how patients are going to react when we are going to have to deliver, this not so good news. How do you manage their emotions, or when you're kind of not anticipating their reaction?
We've dealt with a range of patients who have been angry, emotional, grieving, threatening, silent. One of the first things we do is when we go in to make the disclosure, we do introductions. So we acknowledge who's there and why. We make the disclosure. We pause purposefully. If there's an emotional reaction, we acknowledge it. I think that's one of the most respectful things you can do, is recognize, acknowledge, and support that a person might be angry. They might be upset. They might be grieving. He or she might be grieving. And so recognizing and acknowledging those emotions. In one disclosure in particular, I remember we had Kleenex, we had water, we had wet washcloths, and we planned pauses during the disclosure to give them time to react. And we did not react to the anger. One of the best things you can do is be still and listen. So that's active listening. That sets a tone for the team. It shows respect for the team members who may also be emotional during the disclosure. Mm-hmm. It empowers the patient through that acknowledgement, and then they're empowered to be human. Mm-hmm. And then when they are ready to ask questions, when you pause, and even after the conclusion of that meeting, you give them additional information, including contact information for any follow-up questions. They're empowered to be engaged in the process. So by planning, you are actually supporting the process at just about every phase, and not just for the team members, for the patient who are also team members. So there are two facets of the team, the clinical side and the patient side. So you're bringing them together for that purpose.
Nice. And that actually, I like this scenario because it ties in so many elements of the peer model. You just mentioned, in fact, almost all of them, about empathizing with each other, but also with the patient, really being in tune to how they might be feeling, and also your own emotions, and then empowering each other, empowering the patient, and showing that respect.
I think that's important. I think, though, it's implicit in what I've said. Before you go talk to a patient, you have to manage your own emotions. So that's an element of self-care and team support. We do a lot of counseling and support of teams. The risk management department does. Mm-hmm. And part of that involves advising them on self-care. You don't want a situation where you're doing a disclosure as a team and a team member breaks down. Mm-hmm. It's a human response, but I think it's important to remember, even though it's natural, you have to maintain some professional bearings in the moment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that can be hard.
It can be. It can be.
Paula, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us and our students about what they're about to embark on as they practice an error disclosure simulation.
Well, thank you for having me. Good luck to you students. I hope it goes well. And perhaps if you ever work at UK Healthcare and you need assistance, our paths will cross. Good luck to you all. Thank you.